right. We are live. Welcome everybody to Standing For Truth. My name is Donny. This is Matt. And we are here tonight to discuss a couple interesting topics, a couple of my favorite topics, end times theology, and all things origins. We're going to be talking a little bit about the age of the earth, the question of ancestry, creation, evolution. Matt, you've been busy, brother. I don't know about you, but summer has flown by. We've given a ton of talks. We've hosted many events ranging from interviews to discussions to debates. And so, Matt, how is life over in California, brother?
It's still middle of the summer here, 103 today. So real warm, no problem. Sun everywhere.
I wish I could say the same. Here in Canada, suddenly it's cold, it's muggy, the sun is hiding. But we have these impromptu podcasts to look forward to, brother. And so,
look at that. You're already getting questions.
Yeah, exactly. First, let's say hey to our audience. We are doing this live. So we're going to be live for about an hour. We're going to be talking end time theology. We're going to be discussing origins. And so, yeah, let's address these. You know what? Dr. Dino, let me know through email. I've been meaning to email you because Brian Lauer, he's been looking for somebody, preferably a geologist or a paleontologist, somebody in the field to debate the topic of the Grand Canyon. And so what best explains the Grand Canyon, essentially? Young Earth creation or the old Earth model? We can even focus it in on geology. And so good question. Shoot me an email if you could, Doc, just to remind me. And Philip, honest question. Why do some Christians believe in a pre-tribulation rapture? Well, I can't speak for all Christians, but I suspect in many ways, and understandably so, it's a comfort doctrine to feel like, well, you're not going to have to be here for the war of the Antichrist, the attack of Satan through the Antichrist on believers, to feel like you get to escape or avoid great tribulation. And so it's unscriptural, that's for sure. We'll cover a little bit of that today. The Bible's pretty clear, but I think that could be one of the reasons, as it's to them, it provides comfort that they won't have to face what the Bible clearly describes as heavy persecution and tribulation. Dr. Dino says could be fun. Yeah, I think that'd be fun. I'd love to get you and Brian Lauer into the schedule on the Grand Canyon. We'll pick a good thesis or resolution that focuses on the Grand Canyon, but we can get some geology in there as well, as I know you're a geologist, Doc. Okay, so Matt, we've presented numerous times this summer, and we've also done it was a roughly 4.5 to 5 hour marathon debate with Culture Tap.
Still recovering.
Yes. Right. Our backs and necks have not been the same since. And so we have a talk at Dr. Dino's boot camp this Sunday, and we will be presenting on scientific facts that confirm young Earth creation, that dismantle evolution. Now, as we've learned, as we've presented, Matt, over the course of the last few months, genetics has literally discovered our first parents, the first couple, Adam and Eve. There's one singular Y chromosomal ancestor that all men have descended from. Every single male Y chromosome on the planet, if you compare them, they're nearly identical, low genetic diversity. We know the mutation rate in the Y chromosome is high, a lot higher than evolutionists would want, proponents of evolution, somewhere between 1 and 3 per generation. So with low diversity and a fast mutation rate, the Y chromosome is larger than the mitochondrial DNA. Mitochondrial DNA is about 16,500 letters. The Y chromosome, if I remember correctly, is about 60 to 65 million DNA letters. Okay, so low diversity, fast mutation rates in the Y chromosome and mitochondrial DNA. Those are uniparentally inherited DNA compartments. Mitochondrial DNA is passed down maternally from the mother's side, Y chromosome paternally from the father's side. And you can't get in that, you can't explain the level of diversity, why it's so low in light of the fast mutation rate, if you're an evolutionist. How are you going to take the mitochondrial DNA and the Y chromosome back 100 to 200,000 years? You'd expect a lot more DNA variation. When you consider all these facts, what you get is biblical time. We also know in the mitochondrial DNA, you got your three major haplogroups, L, M, and N. All mitochondrial DNA worldwide can be traced back to those three main haplogroups, which fits nicely, doesn't it, Matt, with what the Bible says? We start with two people, Adam and Eve. 2,000 years later, we have a bottleneck due to the global, not local, Genesis flood. And from there, the earth restarts. The earth repopulates from three reproducing couples, because you got Noah, his wife, their three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their three wives. And so to the evolutionists, that's just a big fat coincidence, basically, that we have these three major haplogroups, L, M, and N. So the genetic data, the point of this, Matt, the genetic data is on our side. But if I were an evolutionist, Matt, I might say this to you, and I want to see you dismantle it, Matt style. So, Matt, I'm an evolutionist right now. Don't you know that mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosome Noah, they didn't just exist as two people. Firstly, they were separated by tens of thousands of years. And secondly, let's take mitochondrial Eve. She wasn't the first mother. She wasn't the only woman at that time. She existed in a population and in Africa. And so this is all contradictory to biblical expectations if we're to take the account of Genesis as literal history. And so, Matt, you silly young earth creationist, don't you know this?
Okay, time to share screen. We've heard this ad nauseum, and you're right. It is very peculiar when you say that we have fast mutation rates and low genetic diversity, but also that these just so happen to magically line up on the biblical young earth creation timeline. That's what I like to tell people. Look, just like what you said earlier, it is thought as though we split from a common ancestor about 5 to 6 million years ago, more than enough time for substantial genetic differences to develop. Why aren't they there? Gee, I wonder. The answer is right in front of their face, but they can't see it because they don't know an alternative view that they're allowed or willing to accept. So therefore, that's where we come in, because we are allowed to view things differently, because we're not in school where we have to give answers from a textbook or else we will fail. So therefore, we can use our logical conclusions. We can say, okay, if the evidence is pointing to this, what are the odds that it would be pointing to that? One of those things that you just mentioned is that, well, sure, look, there's plenty of other people alive at the exact same time. And that right there is plenty of evidence that the most recent common ancestor isn't the first woman. It's just the first woman whose mitochondrial lives on into us. Okay. So now it becomes the problem. We have a world completely full of people about 6,000 years ago, right? Okay. So this is true. We're going by the evolutionary timeline, because this is exactly what the evidence is pointing to. But we're going to use evolution to refute this. So if we have a world completely full of people scattered about 6,000 years ago, we have to go, how many people were there? Well, we can go straight to the internet and ask, how many people were alive about 4,000 BC? We get about 60 to 70 million people. Well, there's approximately about 14 million people lived on Earth about 6,000 years ago. We'll go with this. We'll go with this number. We're going to cut that number in half, right? Why? Because that's how many women would have been alive, probably. So now we have limited gene flow. We have small populations. We have people around the world isolated in different areas. What does this mean? Well, you can basically run the calculation yourself on any simulator that you want. Go to AI, go to simulations. It doesn't matter what you choose. The probability of all human beings alive today from a common ancestor going back to 6,000 years ago is essentially virtually zero. It's going to be absolutely nothing, because there's islands where there's isolated people still reproducing. In the evolutionary model, you still have Australia that literally has people, aboriginals in it, isolated for thousands of years. And then all of a sudden they intermingle with people. Well, what happens when you test the aboriginal mitochondrial DNA? It aligns with everybody else's. Why is that? They're not supposed to have a mitochondrial recent ancestor 6,000 years ago as well. They would actually need a bottleneck to occur decade after decade after decade for a most recent common ancestor to even remotely work. And they've run this. They've actually done the simulation. They need a catastrophic bottleneck every 30 years. And they've actually looked into this and found like there isn't even a bottleneck that's occurring every 50 years. So how in the world are we going to accomplish this? So this actually became a paradox. And it's still a paradox, by the way, with no obvious solution. So when people out there on the internet say, oh, this isn't a big deal, we can explain that. You actually can't. They need a net population of 0 for massive amounts of time. There is no tribe on Earth that has a population growth rate of 0. And that is why we started out saying that there should be more genetic differences, and there just aren't. And that's where we go back. I feel bad we're even talking about this. Everyone wants to talk about tribulation. We'll have to probably come back to this. But one more thing about that. This is the death blow. And this is where it comes in handy. We're going to talk about mutation rates of animals real quick, because guess what? It isn't just the most recent common ancestor of humans we're talking about. It's the most recent common ancestor of animals that also land on the biblical timeline, either Noah's flood or creation. Why the 2 different dates? Because some lineages had up to 7 different pairs on the ark, and therefore they would have had mitochondrial that would have taken them back to a recent ancestor of creation. So they'll have a little bit further of a date back. Some were only brought on by 2s, like you'll get cats. And cats will have will land on the global bottleneck of the Noah's flood because they were brought on by 2s. So we can actually test this, and we have. We've tested penguins, for example. They land right on the biblical time frame for their most recent common ancestor. We have their mutation rate, and these come from germline pedigree mutation rate studies, the versions that we like, that we can make predictions on, not the assumption-based inference of the fossil record version. We did the same thing with whales. And the reason we know whales went through a bottleneck is because of global whaling. They almost made whales go completely extinct when they were killing them for their fat and oil. So what they did is they said, okay, let's run a pedigree mutation rate study. And look, down here, the mutation rate was way different than their phylogenetic rate, which was here, which was calibrated from the fossil record. And sure enough, it was the pedigree rate that matched historical settings to when this actually occurred, going back quite a while in history. And then comes the chicken pedigree. The chicken is a very good one because it's a deep-rooted pedigree. You see, humans only go back a few generations. At most, you might get 11. But what happens when you run a 50 generation is now you can take that human pedigree and relay it over from the chicken mutation rate, and you'll get about 1,500 years. That's a very long time because you're getting 50 generations of humans. And that's exactly what the chicken pedigree did. It ran back 50 generations, and it obviously didn't match the pedigree rate, which they thought it would again. And the very cool thing about it is it matched the pedigree that we find in human beings, which is 15 times faster than usual. So we find it in birds, we find it in whales, we find it in pretty much everything that's ever been pedigree mutation rate studied. And when they try to say, well, selection is removing those mutations over time, you got to account for purifying selection. Well, that's what this chicken study did. It went back 50 generations, and that can account for purifying selection, because it's not just going back 3 or 4 or 5 generations, it's going back multiple generations. Plenty of time for purifying selection to kick in and slow that mutation rate down, pushing it more to that phylogenetic mutation rate. And that didn't happen. So another epic, easy way to just devastate the most recent common ancestor argument are by animals. Their mutation rate goes back to the biblical timeline. And then you have the statistical probability where you can run any simulation you want 6,000 years ago, and you can run it yourself saying, what is the chances of there being a most recent common ancestor just 6,000 years ago? Of that, just that happening, and use their own numbers about how many people they think were alive on Earth. And because islands existed, because there's isolated people groups, because that alone makes the most recent common ancestor for 6,000 years, completely improbable. You just can't have it. So they have to invoke multiple bottlenecks, but you can't. They would need evidence for that. What could, Donny, what could cause a global bottleneck to wipe out all aquatic life, all land life 6,000 years ago, according to the evolutionary model?
Right. Since they deny the worldwide flood of Genesis.
Right. There's nothing. They have nothing.
No.
There's nothing. So they have to just say that they're wrong. They just, well, those numbers are wrong. They're not true. So they're the ones that have to deny the empirical, the observable, the testable, and the repeatable science and go to their fossil record and say it's better anyway, without any of the evidence to back it up and without any predictions to be made. So I think it's just a ridiculous thing to say the most recent common answer doesn't mean the first. Yeah, we know it doesn't. And there's a lot of scenarios, true, where animals did get bottlenecked after the flood, and they do go back to a most recent common ancestor just like 1,000 years ago. That doesn't matter, though. We're talking about look at the entire picture. Study all the animals and look at every pedigree study. We're not looking at one. If you just look at one single study, you're going to get a mess, because some studies don't even find mutations. They go to islands where they test a single hypervariable region and they test.
Right. That's what I was going to ask you about.
You know what I mean? Yeah. They'll go to an island and they'll test one family line that was highly inbred after just a couple generations. And then they'll like, oh, look, we didn't find any mutations. Therefore,
wouldn't that example, wouldn't we expect a slower mutation rate if you're on an island, these island populations, let's say the Canary Islands, for example, right. If these are inbred, isolated populations, would we expect a faster mutation rate in those people groups, Matt?
It depends on how long they live. Did they live long enough for hyper mutations to kick in? Do they have any branching out and expansion? Or are they literally trapped on a very small island where inbreeding is going to take them out real quick? And that's exactly what we see, where their mutations were turning over on each other in certain areas. They're becoming homozygous, and they were killing themselves rapidly within just a few generations. Now, if they had a chance to expand and fill up the island before inbreeding became a problem, then yes, we'll see hypermutations kicking in at the same time, because the body's trying to heal itself and trying to repair. You know, that's one of the reasons God told everybody, even at the Tower of Babel behind me, he said, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Don't stay in one place. That's why he confused the languages to begin with, to save us from ourselves, because we were going to kill ourselves and we didn't know it genetically.
So these examples that our good friend Dr. Dan Stern Cardinal employs, puts forth to counter what we're saying on the biblical model of ancestry, where we have Adam and Eve going back between 4,500 and 6,000 years, confirming the Bible's account of origins. When he points to examples like the Canary Islands, do examples like that miss these important points, Matt?
Well, when you're looking at a single study and you're calibrating your own mutation rate clock and you're calibrating it to dates that you believe are true based on the past to say, look, it agrees, you've also now moved away from science, and you're trying to make the evidence that you believe fit the data. When you calibrate and make up your own clock, you can make anything fit. I have a puzzle that I can flip over and build without looking at the picture. How? I've got a hammer. I'll make that sucker fit. I've got glue and duct tape too. It's guaranteed to work. So is it really a good puzzle? No, of course not. You're making it up as you go along. His study has failed multiple times, because the very first time he goes to those Canary Islands, he picks a date that's based on radiometric dating of carbon dating that's done on seashells when they believe they were carved. And he goes, look, that's when the island was first inhabited. But we have actual evidence when the island was first inhabited by the Romans, who actually went there to get the purple dye extract because they loved the Roman color purple. And so they went to that island, and guess what? They didn't document any natives there. So the date that he made up doesn't even match the historical evidence. So then the Romans, they documented that there was nobody on the island. They went to the island. They did a couple harvestings, and they didn't like it. So what did they do? They brought slaves there. They dropped them off because the island was inhospitable, very, very harsh island. They didn't want to work it. They didn't want to live there. So they brought slaves over, and they started to inhabit the island. So that was the first inhabitants of the island. And it doesn't even match his own pedigree mutation rate study. I'm sorry, it doesn't even match his phylogenetic mutation rate study. His is all based on radiometric dating. It doesn't, there's no historical value to it at all, because we have the historical data and it contradicts it. So,
well, and another point Dan and others don't like is what we find and what we've discussed here in the literature people like Fatuma, world famous evolutionary scientist, they've pointed out that your neutral, I would argue nearly neutral mutation rate approximates the fixation rate. And so when they want to make this giant disconnect, Matt, between the observed empirical rate and your phylogenetic or fixation rate, when they want to disconnect those, what they're missing is, well, wait a minute, the neutral mutation rate approximates the fixation rate, which means both are fast, both fit within biblical time, but they point to selection. So Dan would point to selection as being a mechanism to basically disconnect the observed rate and the fixation rate by enough to where the fixation rate is a lot slower than the observed rate. But even those in the evolutionist camp, those that have studied this, like Fatuma and other population geneticists, they would understand, Matt, and maybe you can speak to this. They would understand that according to the evolutionary model, these last 4,000 to 6,000 years of history, again, according to the evolutionary model, this is like the tip of a needle, right? You have a needle and there's the very tip of it in terms of history. The majority of their history with humans was in Africa. You have this out of Africa scenario where you have humans existing in smaller populations, isolated in tribes. You wouldn't have random mating for the most part because people typically marry and have kids within their own tribes. Whereas today you could have intermarriage between, people in Australia, people in Canada, America. We have that privilege. But historically, that wasn't really the case. And so for most of evolutionary history, you have humans existing in smaller populations. They're isolated, which means fixation will be faster. Now today, because people are spread out all parts of the globe, and we have a larger population between 7 and 8 billion people, then yes, fixation is basically zero. The time it would take for these alleles to get stuck in place, right? Yeah. Reach 100% frequency. Yeah, it's basically zero. But that's a very small portion of the history that evolutionists believe in terms of humans. Okay, so that's why there's a counterbalancing where, yeah, the neutral mutation rate does approximate the fixation rate. Okay, this is what I want you to speak to. I would argue, and this is kind of an argument we've put forth, a model we hold to. Today, again, even according to the creationist model, we live in the same world as the evolutionists, right, Matt? Fixation is slow today. But we have this very interesting time period where we can build these models and see how fast fixation would have been, how many mutations could have been removed, how fast the population grew, how large was the population of Babel, for example. So we have this time period, let's say between 300 and 500 years after the flood. From the flood to the Tower of Babel, the earth restarts with 8 people, 3 reproducing couples, and they don't spread out to all parts of the globe until after Babel. And so that means you have 300 to 500 years where fixation could be faster. And today it's basically zero. But again, even in the creation model, you can have this balancing out effect where your neutral mutation rate, which is fast, approximates your long-term substitution rate. Matt, what are your thoughts on that? Is that a possibility in the creation model where you'd have fixation being faster after the flood up until the Tower of Babel dispersal?
I mean, it would have to be, right? We have 8 people growing in 3 separate groups. And, Ham, Shem, and Japheth, they each had their own family. They moved to different regions. They grew up their own families. And then they have time elapsing until they get to the Tower of Babel, where they all now unite. It could be anywhere between 100 to 850 years. And then what happens is now they're united. They're building the tower behind me. And all of a sudden, their languages are confused and confounded. And the 70 nations now break up. So all of the people, let's say 12,000 people building this tower, are now broken up into 70 groups. That's about 170 people, maybe each group. Now, what do? 170 people. Now you've got another bottleneck. Fixation is going to be quick yet again, starting out. Now these people branch out, migrate to the lands that they inherited. And now they start to grow in their population size. Fixation, boom, rapidly growing in a small population multiple times already. So yes, we can definitely count using our own mutation rate, using the observed mutation rate. We can literally account for the haplogroup formations and the fixations for how many fixed substitutions there are. Why are there only 24 if 200,000 years passed? That makes no sense based on the rapid rate of the substitution rate. Look at the substitution rates of studies, guys. Just look at them here. I'll pull them up for you real quick. Let me find them. You guys are going to look at a chart now, and it's going to show you the vast array of different substitution rates and mutation rates that have taken place in the human population. And what you'll notice is there's a very consistent theme. And this theme is they're all fast. They're all rapid. They don't match evolutionary predictions at all. That's what I had showed you on this one anyway. You're looking at a fast rate, which is observed up here in the left-hand corner, and then the assumed rate in the very bottom right-hand corner. Again, another falsification that doesn't seem to falsify evolution. It's almost like they can get anything wrong at any time, and it really just never matters. What does that tell you about a model? Pretty much anything you need to know right there. And here we go. Okay, here's studies going all the way back to 1991. And on the far right, you'll see substitution rates. And what that means is there's a substitution that arises in the population, one of them every 25 generations. And how fast it reaches fixation in that population is dependent on its size. So some are like 1 in 95, 1 in 25, 1 in 55, 1 in 35, 1 in 60, 36. You get these low numbers. Evolution predicted 1 out of like 800. That's really slow. That's not even remotely close to what we see. So the question you need to ask yourselves is, how come the substitution rate doesn't even remotely get to the evolutionary timelines? They need to go back 200,000 years, and they don't even come close to that. Not even close. That's why they start invoking rescue devices, as we like to call them, especially on selection. But look, right. Selection has already been accounted for back in 2000. He concluded that selection is unlikely to even be a major factor that underlies the differences between the phylogenetic and pedigree mutation rates.
Wow.
At this point, the results suggest that selection has not preferentially distorted the pedigree mutation spectrum. Uh-oh. You mean Dan's favorite argument has already been studied and investigated over 20 years ago and been concluded that it has no effect on the mutation rate? Could it be? Shocker. Even Kimura said rapid selective evolution requires unrealistically high rates of beneficial mutations. And then look at this. It's rather the phylogenetic rate that estimate that is biased. It is clear that pedigree studies provide a direct estimate of the mutation rate studies.
Right.
Game over, guys.
Especially game over if we still have that mutation rate that observed. When we're talking about pedigrees, to those in the audience, let's say you have, grandmothers, mothers, daughters, and you're looking at mitochondrial DNA, since that's maternally inherited. Well, you can count up the differences and come to a rate, and we know it's fast. We do the same thing with the Y chromosome with men, and it's also fast. And the citation you had there, Matt, is fascinating, because they were saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, that's right from the conventional literature, that selection is probably not going to do much to change what we observe and the so-called phylogenetic rate.
Right. And that's all that matters, right? This is the observed. This is what we witness. This is what we make predictions on. They can say we're wrong until they're blue in the face. It's not going to save them. It hasn't helped them at all. All it does is make them look desperate. And because they are desperate, the only reason they don't like these rates is because they land on the biblical timeline. That's it. If they didn't land on the biblical timeline, I guarantee you they would be using these against us. I promise you they would. So if these pedigree mutation rates are so pointless, why do they keep doing them? Why do scientists even waste their time doing these elaborate studies that take time and money if they're worthless and don't have any real world application? So if evolution is based on mutations, and if mutation rates are fast, they require to be slow, it changes everything. Why? Because evolution can't even get mutations right. That's the basis of the entire theory. These observed mutation rates, they're used by the FBI. They match historical events. They're used by us, young Earth creationists, to make accurate testable predictions. They're found in animals, insects, reptiles, birds, aquatic life. They land on the biblical young Earth creation timeline and not even remotely close to the evolutionary timeline. They want us to ignore all that, by the way. Just who cares? You need to take selection into account. Stupid. It's already been accounted for. It's already been looked at. I've shown you where the geneticists themselves that looked into it said, nope, doesn't make any difference. We find deep-rooted pedigree studies, doesn't make a difference. But yet they want us to ignore all that. Why?
Yeah. So, Matt, you would say the Parsons paper, which they love, and I'm being sarcastic, they hate that so much because of the data it gives us. They like to attack it. They like to attack the methodology. They like to say creationists misuse it. But you would say that it's perfectly reasonable to look to the Parsons paper and the results there to support young Earth creation. And essentially the evolutionists have not done a good job to rebut that.
No, of course not. Matter of fact, he came under a lot of heat when this was originally published. A lot of people think this was just Parsons himself that ran this study magically by himself. That's not true at all. Parsons actually had 10 geneticists, some of the best in the world. They're actually still working, by the way, in genetics and still publishing papers outside of this. And so what they did is he supplied them the database for the forensic FBI. He's the one that said, hey, come over here. I've got the blood bank. I've got the genetics. Let's pull this together. You come work with me and let's figure this thing out. So he ran this, and when he did it and he came out with the results of this, I just scanned way down on my list. When he came out with this most recent common ancestor 6,500 years ago, the community, the evolutionary community, didn't know what to do with it. They did not like it. Obviously, they thought something was wrong. They go, what's even going on here? That can't be true. But because he had all these geneticists working with him that ran the numbers ad nauseum, this selection, they tested it with selection. They tested it with the substitution rate. They tested it with the mutation rate. They, like I showed you earlier, they tested the blood bank had all different forms of ethnic people from around the world. It wasn't just some random group of people like the Amish, which he studied them as well, by the way, and was the first person to catalog that they have a slower mutation rate, about 7 to 14%. But he said, oh, look, we have a very rapid substitution rate in the AFDIL family, the most out of anyone. The 73 of the lineages had a substitution rate of 1 out of every 17 generations, extremely fast. But he used the average and went with just 1 out of 32. And I showed you over here how he ran the coalescence to determine when was the most recent common ancestor using coalescence, taking it backwards in time. So they ran every possible scenario that there was. And they didn't, the critics didn't like it. So he was joined a year later by Holland, a critic, actually. So said, I'll run it with you and your team, and we'll do it again. Why? Because they didn't want it to be true, and they couldn't accept it to be true. Even though the FBI was like, this is fine. We're totally fine. As long as we have a mutation rate where we can convict and catch killers, we're good to go. Obviously, Donny, if you and I were cousins, and I killed somebody, and they found blood, and they go, oh, you did it. You'd be like, hey, I didn't do it. I wasn't there. And then they go, well, the DNA looks very close to you. And then they go, well, you say, somebody else is there related to me. They would go, well, the blood looks very, very similar to yours. They're going to test it, and they're going to go, oh, look at that. It's a couple mutations different. Then they know it wasn't you, because you can't have, you have to have your amount inside your DNA. And so that's how they test whether or not a sibling or a parent, a dad or a son actually committed a crime, because they just look to the next generation. If they have more mutations, they know the kid did it. So these are empirical rates that were used, and Parsons was completely fine. And he even challenged people later to say, hey, if you think my rate's wrong, bring it on. Go ahead and publish your study.
We got that email from him.
Yeah. We asked him straight out. And he'll take on any challenges. He's been challenged before, so he was not thrilled to get an email about it being challenged.
Were you underwhelmed or overwhelmed by conspiracy cats who we respect, and it really was a privilege and a ton of fun to debate him. But in terms of the material of the debate, were you overwhelmed or underwhelmed by his responses to our overall arguments on mutation rates and DNA diversity?
It seemed like they were, what's the word? They were planned ahead of time. They didn't seem to actually answer what we were saying. You know, they were scripted. They were scripted. They were very old answers. It's like he's said these things before, and they didn't really match what we were saying. My entire opening was untouched. Not a single subject of anything in my opening was even looked at. So yeah, I think that he had an idea in his mind what we were going to say, and then we didn't say it, so he was really thrown off. He kept talking about bacteria, and he kept talking, and then he brought up the sea floor thing. It's like, what are we even talking about here? This is evidence for Adam and Eve, and he didn't talk about Adam and Eve at all. So I don't know. He must have had too much chai or something before that. Before that, he wasn't
coal formation, isochron, and yet we still addressed all of the off topic that is to Adam and Eve. Now he could argue, well, in the resolution, you also had biblical creation in there. And so he interprets biblical creation to mean young earth creation. And that's how we'd interpret it as well. And so we were happy to address those points.
Yeah.
Plus be able to put forth a strong case for Adam and Eve based on many lines of evidence. But one major line of evidence, which you're discussing here, my brother, mutation rates, DNA diversity, the observed mutation rate, way higher than that expected or predicted through evolutionary theory. And Paul Price here, God bless, brother, good to have you. We're working on finalizing details for a debate between him and Dr. Zach Hancock. And so we really appreciate the engagement from Dr. Zach Hancock. We always say he's one of our favorite evolutionists, so that should be a good debate. And Paul says this: Cardinal and Hancock, from their paper, are trying to argue for adaptive peaks. Yeah, they argue for adaptive evolution. Basically, if I remember correctly from their paper and then from the debate with Jerry Bergman, Zach Hancock showed in a graph from his paper that basically you have nearly neutral mutations, slightly deleterious mutations building up, accumulating. He did acknowledge that the majority of mutations are slightly deleterious, but they build up to where eventually selection sees them and removes them. So very few of them actually reach fixation. He showed a few of them reaching fixation, but at the same time, you have beneficial mutations reaching fixation. And apparently in a growing population with just a small amount of beneficial mutations reaching fixation, according to their paper and the modeling that they employed, slightly deleterious mutation accumulation is not a problem, and evolution can still take place because these compensatory mutations are basically compensating for the damage. So essentially they're showing that slightly beneficial mutations go rapidly to fixation. That means the debate is going to boil down largely to the shape of the mutation effect curve and mating strategies within the models being employed. But I would also argue and challenge them on the nature of the beneficials that are going to fixation. Are these truly beneficial mutations, or are they reductive in some way? Rather than saying new mutation or adding mutation or a loss of information, I like asking the evolutionist, show me a handful of mutations, right, Matt, that are non-reductive. What I mean by reductive is this mutation, although beneficial in a context, they are overall functionally compromising to the organisms that experience them. And you can take sickle cell anemia, for example. It does have a small benefit. It would prevent people with sickle cell anemia from getting malaria. But overall, when you look under the hood at the genotype, it is a reduction. It is functionally compromising. It's due to a broken gene, broken cell, broken protein. And so, sure, they can provide some truly beneficial mutations that are non-reductive, I'm sure, but they're going to have to provide a lot more than just a few that are not functionally compromising to organisms, because I would argue that a beneficial mutation that's reductive in some way, that reaching fixation is not going to act as the kind of compensatory mutation that they would want it to. And so point is, the debate gets technical really quick. And so I appreciate the comment, Paul, and hopefully we get that debate in the books. And so, okay, Matt, since we got about 20 minutes left, did you have something that you wanted to add to before we move on to another topic in terms of mutation rates, brother?
Sure, why not a triggering little meme here?
There we go.
Look at this. There we go. Retrofitting the data. This is what I think of evolution. This is what I've come to the conclusion. They like to take evidence. They fail a prediction that they make. They go, oh man, that was way off. Oh well, no problem. Let's just turn that around and retrofit that right back into the model. I know we predicted that there were no genetic similarities in the past, or that we wouldn't find any homologous genes, but we have. So you know what? That's great evidence for evolution. That shows common ancestry.
Right. Yeah. What they love is one of their best. Right. You go to the BioLogos website, for example, and homologous patterns, homology and shared structures, right? That's one of the so-called best evidence for evolution, common descent.
Yeah.
But yet, as you've pointed out so brilliantly, Matt, and correct me if I'm wrong in how you explain it, if deep time evolution were true, and these neutral or nearly neutral mutations have been accumulating for hundreds of thousands to millions of years, why do we have any genetic level homology at all? Why do we have these strong signatures in terms of homology and genetics? Because those mutations should have scrambled those signatures over time. They should have scrambled the nested hierarchical patterns that we find in DNA. That includes mitochondrial DNA, Y chromosome, and autosomal nuclear DNA in general. And so, Matt, would you say that the strong signatures that we find on a DNA level in both homology and nested hierarchies, those were not actually predicted by evolutionists?
Absolutely not. That goes all the way back to the early findings, like the head-to-head predictions from Ernest Mayr, and right out the gate. Matter of fact, he was the one that said the search for homologous genes is quite futile, except in maybe very close relatives. And this is the guy that invented the founder effect. This guy's like, he's legit. He knows what he's doing. And he said that, mutations would have scrambled a genome into oblivion. There should be nothing left from a distant ancestor. You and an alligator would share zero genetic similarity. You and a banana would share nothing. There should be nothing left based on the rate of mutation that's occurring. And what ended up happening? Well, in 1975, he predicted from the creation model based on homology, which was Sir Richard Owens, based on his predictions of genetic similarity based on homology, based on creation. And then there's taxonomy, which is Carl Linnaeus, who also used creation to base his taxonomy on nested hierarchical patterns. He did the same thing, but he took it a step further because we were entering the genetic age. And he said, hey, let's use this in genetics. I'm going to predict genetic similarity based on the same exact pattern that we've always been predicting. And that ended up being true. 2 years later, bam, they discovered the Hox gene in fruit flies. And it was shared with the vast majority of life. The body layout plan was shared across organisms, confirming the prediction right from the creationist and falsifying evolution again. Now, what do they use? They go, no biologist even had the foggiest notion that such similarities could exist between genes of such different animals. It was inescapable and stunning. So we won again, but guess what? Evolution now uses this as their best piece of evidence. And creationists don't even mention it. They don't even know. Of course, I'm going to tell everybody this. This was an ultimate failure and falsification of evolution right out the gate.
They don't like when you point this out, do they, Matt?
No, they do not like it.
And I know they know this is true, Matt, because every time I point this out to them, rather than showing me where they predicted it, or rather than conceding, you know what they do? They go right to the rescue device. They go right to the why. rather than first saying that, yeah, we didn't really expect this. We didn't really predict this, even though the gold standard of science is what, Matt? Making testable and falsifiable predictions. And so if all we get are retrodictions and all we get are rescue devices, then how good is this theory? Sure, you throw a million things at the fridge, one or two things might stick. But a model is not necessarily judged by the good lines of evidence. What about the failed predictions, right? Exactly. It has been said in the past, and it's been attributed to Einstein, and I'm paraphrasing, that a million experiments or observations can be consistent with my model, but all it takes is one solid observation that precludes it, that falsifies it, that could prove me wrong. And so, sure, the evolutionists can point to agnostic pieces of evidence all day, or pieces of evidence that they think favors their position. But what about those observations that make evolution impossible? Because again, it's been stated by good scientists that all it takes is one. Isn't that right, Matt?
It works in court too. You can have 99 pieces of evidences saying, hey, I wasn't there when that guy died. When they walk in and find that one piece of evidence with your fingerprint on it, you killed him, you're toast. Right. You're done. Right. And that's the thing. Evolution has failed miserably at making predictions because it was all made up. It's all made up in the past. And look, they will know this. We will tell them this, and they will defend the liar. This is what gets me. Look, this is what Charles Lyell said. I devoured Lamarck. His theories delighted me. His argument is, if pushed as far as it must go, would prove that men may have come from the orangutan. Early on, this idea, if they could push this onto the public, if they could get them to believe it, if they can dupe them and lie to them about this, we can get them to believe it, then boom, we've got them. That's what Charles Lyell did. His goal was to free the sciences of Moses. And he did a brilliant job because he was a lawyer. He knew how to twist words and twist the public into believing nonsense. He lied down the line on lots of things. But we only found this out after he died from letters in his diary that he wrote to other people. But we will show them this with a source. That's what he said. And they'll just be like, oh well, you know. Then they'll defend it. That's even crazier. They'll defend the liar and attack you after you told them that they were lied to. Absolute lunacy. This is where this comes from. You being related to primates comes from that guy right there who Charles Darwin took Charles Lyell's work and took it with him, and he was highly influenced. He loved Charles Lyell's book in Principles of Geology, and that influenced Charles Darwin, who took this and molded it into Darwinian evolution, which is worldwide popular today. All from a myth. All that made up myth, twisted to make the evidence, try to make it look like we're related. Crazy.
Unbelievable. And I see a couple of good comments in the chat from creationists about homology. Another thing too that I like to now point out is the shared features that we see in the biological world. The fact that we do see these nested hierarchical patterns that we as humans share more in terms of morphology, anatomy, physiology, and genetics with, let's say, a chimpanzee and a monkey than we do with a dog, a fish, or a bacteria, or a mouse. These hierarchical patterns, but also the homologous patterns that we see, this is essential to have the biological order organized this way. Because of this design, it allows us, Matt, as humans, as scientists, to study the biological world and make some truly incredible discoveries on things like medicine. Think about it. If the created order was not designed in hierarchies or in homologous patterns, we could not study disease, learn more about disease by looking to mice, doing experiments on mice, for example, because we have those similarities. So we can learn about the biological world, and we can learn more about ourselves, and we can invent important medicines, let's say, because of those similarities. But if the biological world was not ordered that way, we couldn't study. We couldn't learn more about ourselves. We couldn't invent important things. And so I think that's a practical approach as well. But in general, human engineers design in homologous patterns. Human engineers design and nested hierarchical patterns. Why shouldn't God? Matt, that's an interesting picture you have on the screen, brother. Did you want to speak to that?
Oh, this was just a something taken straight out of scripture with the father of homology. He actually read through Genesis and he noticed that there was a pattern from sea creatures to birds to land to animals and eventually humans, and he created a pattern called structuralism, and he based it off of the design of the spine, and he actually predicted that there would be something called an archetype, and that it would be the original design and everything would be based off of that, flowing all the way up into humans. And they actually found it in the fossil record. How crazy is that? So talk about a prediction. And he based this on biblical creation. And here's one of the statements: the ideal, original, or fundamental pattern on which a natural group of animals or systems of organs has been constructed, and to modifications of which the various of such animals or organs may be referred. So he's referring to a hierarchical pattern that goes back to creation that God would have used to format and create all life. And that hierarchical pattern is exactly what we've been talking about. And this was all way back, already going back in time. And that's why Charles Darwin actually took what he said about similarity due to common design, and he just swapped it for similarity due to common ancestry.
So he hijacked it.
Yeah, he plagiarized it like crazy. I mean, he was notorious for plagiarizing people. He plagiarized Edward Blythe, Patrick Matthews. Matter of fact, he was writing a book when he got work from somebody else. I forget his name. And he just stopped writing his book and went right back to natural selection and finished printing his book because he plagiarized everything from him. He finished his book off from literally just plagiarizing somebody else. So that's Darwin for you. Just constantly take from other people's, don't give them any credit at all, and then just take their work and pretend it's his. He didn't even get natural selection for himself. He just took other people's work and twisted it into his version. So
that's our Charles Darwin. Yeah. And so good points there, brother. So since we titled it, I know some people were interested to see at least a few minutes on end times. Matt and I are going to wrap up somewhat shortly. I'm going to do about 10 minutes, maybe 15 on some end times material. Matt has some really good images. He's going to go over a few little things to kind of give you all a teaser into what we'll be presenting on Sunday. But we've also given several talks over the last few months. Matt, as you know, we've had a lot of fun with that, but you don't always get the time to go through all of the images. And so I think there are some cool images and points that people have not had the privilege to hear. So I'm going to address a couple of these comments, go over a couple visuals for people on end times. Then we're going to hand it to Matt to kind of wind us down with some of his visuals and points. So, okay, let's address a couple of these questions first. And also, again, to the audience, stay tuned. This Sunday, we'll be presenting at Dr. Dino's boot camp. And we'll be talking a lot about homology and nested hierarchies in the context of agnostic evidence. And so I'll be starting the show basically going over the evidence that is agnostic and why it's so important that as creationists and evolutionists, to further the debate and move the debate forward in a positive manner, we need to focus on evidence that can help differentiate between the models. And so as I set the foundation Sunday, as I've done in past presentations, I'll touch on a few differentiating points, but then Matt is just going to do what Matt does best. And it's going to be like, drinking from a fire hose or a fire hydrant. He's just going to bombard us all. He's going to assault our brains with pieces of evidence that only creation can account for. And so, okay, guys, a couple points here on end times. I did a show last night with Pastor Adam Fannin on end times theology and making a case for the pre-wrath rapture. And so there's a couple points I wanted to expand on. So Cal Preston, our resident bench press expert. This guy's a machine right here. SoCal Preston. We'll have to get together, the three of us, and do a workout together sometime in 2026. So, and maybe a little sparring. Hey, Matt, you're a former MMA fighter. You're a retired MMA fighter. So we'll do a little sparring, some young earth creationist sparring. He says, we need to do this in person. Yes. Amen. I went to a Hovind conference over 20 years ago. SoCal has the experience. That's one of the goals for 2026. One of our goals is to do an in-person conference and hopefully get together, all of us on Team SFT, bring in some speakers, possibly incorporate a debate or discussion of some kind. Kathleen Norton, appreciate the comment. It's a tough, gutted out doctrine that matches a works ego to believe one goes through the tribulation. Well, I appreciate the comments and the thoughts. I would say that someone who's not pre-trib could make the same argument or offer the same opinion that it could be egotistical to believe that you are going to escape or be saved from tribulation when over the last couple thousand years since the resurrection of Christ, many believers have died for their faith. They suffered greatly for their faith. They've gone through tribulation. There's Christians today in other parts of the globe that are dying for their faith, that are going through their own kind of tribulation. And so adding a capital T to tribulation, from tribulation to great tribulation, doesn't suddenly mean that, well, I'm deserving to basically be saved from that. Now, if that's God's will, but it's not what the Bible teaches. The Bible teaches clearly that after the tribulation, not before, after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened and the moon shall not give her light. And that's when Jesus Christ comes in the clouds to gather together his elect. We see that in Matthew 24, Luke 21, Mark 13. And that matches beautifully with what we read in Revelation, specifically Revelation 6, when the sun and moon go dark. The great day of his wrath is come. It's now here. And then in Revelation 7, we see the great multitude that no man could number, of all tongues, all nations, all kindreds, suddenly appearing before the throne. They came out of great tribulation. And that really can only be the first resurrection. And it happens after the tribulation and before God's wrath, because we read about God's wrath through the trumpet and vial judgment. The first trumpet judgment, which is God's wrath, is hail and fire cast upon the earth. All the trees, all the grass are burnt up. And so people are going through tribulation today. People have always gone through tribulation. Kathleen Norton, appreciate it. She says the tribulation is a time period with the Antichrist prevailing over tribulation saints. Well, he doesn't prevail, because Jesus is clear in Matthew 24 and other passages that if those days were not shortened, what days? The days of the great tribulation, then no flesh would be saved. Okay, this is talking about physical salvation. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened, and he that endure to the end, the same shall be saved. So what that's saying is, this time of great tribulation is going to be so intense. The persecution is going to be so harsh. It's going to be worldwide on believers. The mark of the beast will be instituted, that Jesus is going to shorten those days, and he is going to come in the clouds, and we are going to be saved out of that tribulation. Okay. We've gone through it, but we'll be saved before Antichrist can fully win. So he's not going to have victory. He is not going to prevail over the tribulation saints, because Jesus Christ is going to come in the clouds before that. And then the Antichrist has to deal with God's wrath through the trumpet and the vial judgment. She says the gates of hell cannot prevail against Jesus's church. Well, the gates of hell are not going to, because the pre-wrath rapture has those days shortened, and Jesus Christ comes in the clouds to gather together his elect. Kathleen Norton, appreciate the comment, sister. She says the tribulation as a set apart time of particular. Yeah. Whether it's capital T tribulation or lowercase t, tribulation is tribulation. It's trouble. It's affliction. It's persecution. Okay. Christians throughout history have faced harsh persecution. They've died for their faith. They've been tortured for their faith. So why do pre-tribbers think that they have this special right where they're going to avoid capital T tribulation? The Bible does not say that we are going to avoid capital T tribulation. It says we're not appointed unto wrath, but wrath is different than tribulation. A synonym for tribulation is affliction. And the Bible says in the same book, if I remember correctly, that we find we're not appointed to wrath, we are appointed to affliction. This time has purposes that do not have to do with the church. That's an assertion not supported by the Bible. The Bible says he prevails during the tribulation. Yeah, he is prevailing over us. It is a struggle. It's a time of great tribulation, but he will not prevail, period. He will not have victory because Jesus Christ is going to gather together his elect after the tribulation of those days. That's what the Bible says. And so we should believe what the Bible says. Kathleen Norton says, because the tribulation does not belong to us. Well, again, these are opinions, these are assertions not supported by scripture, because the scripture says that we are appointed to affliction, but we're not appointed to God's wrath. And so what we read about in Revelation 6 with the seals, as well as Matthew 24, Luke 21, Mark 13, we are reading about the wrath of the devil upon the world at first, and then eventually he focuses in on believers. And so this is tribulation, and there's an important distinction between tribulation and wrath. Wrath is what God does to the unbelieving world. Tribulation or persecution or trouble, this is what the devil or what man does to the believing world. Kathleen Norton says many verses. Well, feel free to provide what you believe is the most powerful verse. And okay, that's all the questions. And I wanted to share a couple things here and then hand it over to Matt. Now, I've written a book on this topic. So for those that want to take a deep dive, you can check out my book, my debates, and my 30-part series. And so the book of Revelation is a fantastic read, especially when you understand the chronology of it. And so it's broken up into two main sections. 1 to 11 starts in 1st century AD in chapter 1, and then 12 to 22. 12, again, we're back in 1st century AD, and there's some beautiful correlations. You see the tribulation in Revelation 6 with the seals, and then you see the tribulation again in Revelation 13 with the mark of the beast, the one world government, the beast system. And as expected, if the pre-wrath rapture model is true, we see the rapture right after the tribulation. We see the great multitude that no man could number, of all tongues and all nations in Revelation 7 and in Revelation 4. If this two-part chronology that I'm putting forth is true, we can make a prediction. Okay, after the descriptions of tribulation in 6 and 13, we should find a rapture event after. And that's exactly what we find. So in Revelation 14, we see Jesus Christ on a white horse with a sickle, and he appears to reap the harvest of the earth. Clearly the rapture. And in Revelation 7, again, we have the great multitude that no man can number. And so that lines up beautifully. Now, my challenge to pre-tribulation advocates is this. They will oftentimes argue that Matthew 24, which describes the rapture as being after the tribulation of those days, they will say Matthew 24 is describing the battle of Armageddon, which is Revelation 20. That is not the rapture, which means they believe that the rapture is a secret rapture, and it's before the tribulation, and that the battle of Armageddon takes place after the seals, trumpets, and vials. Now, here's the problem, and this is what I'd like an answer to. The trumpet and vial judgments contain worldwide cataclysmic events, supernatural, hail and fire cast upon the earth. All the trees, all the grass, everything's burnt up. Mountain is cast into the sea. We read about wormwood. We read about these locusts that come out of the bottomless pit, and they terrorize men on the earth, and they terrorize the unbelieving world. These are not things that you can hide from, okay? But yet, in Matthew 24:37, it says, "But as the days of Noah were, so shall also be the coming of the Son of Man." And it describes men eating, drinking, and marrying. For as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying, and given in marriage until the day Noah entered into the ark. Here's the problem for the pre-tribber. If Matthew 24 is describing the battle of Armageddon, then where are the trumpet and vial judgments in Matthew 24? As expected, if the pre-wrath rapture is true, post-tribulation pre-wrath, we read about the seals. We read about great tribulation, which lines up perfectly with Revelation 6. Antichrist goes forth to conquer. The world is at war. We see famine, pestilence, death. We see martyrs. Then eventually we see the sun and moon go dark. And then Jesus Christ comes in the clouds to gather together his elect. Revelation 6 describes the great day of his wrath is now here. Great multitude that no man could number appear before the throne in Revelation 7. This all fits perfectly. But the pre-trib rapture model is all over the place. They can't address these points. They have to put forth a bunch of rescue devices to explain them away. Okay, show me pre-tribber. If Matthew 24 is describing the battle of Armageddon when Jesus comes on a white horse rather than the rapture, where are the trumpet and vial judgments? Where are these locusts that come out of the bottomless pit to terrorize men on the earth? Where's hail and fire cast upon the earth, where all the trees and all the grass are burnt up? It's not there, but it's awfully convenient, if the pre-trib rapture is true, that God would leave out those important details. But it makes sense in the pre-wrath rapture model, because you have the seals. Then at the sixth seal, the sun and moon go dark. Then you have the rapture. This is after the tribulation. Then you have the beginning of God's wrath. That means we don't find God's wrath in Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21, because the pre-tribulation rapture is false. And the trumpet and vial judgments come after the rapture. And if you want to read about those important details, those cataclysmic worldwide supernatural events, then you have to go to the book of Revelation and you have to read about what happens after the tribulation and after the rapture. Now, here's another point. If this is the battle of Armageddon, then it doesn't make sense that the unbelieving world are going to be marrying, eating, drinking, being in a time of peace. Because no, if you have hail and fire cast upon the earth, if you have these locusts coming out onto the earth, terrorizing the unbelieving world, you have a mountain cast into the sea, wormwood, you have the drinking water poison, complete and utter chaos. Okay. That doesn't fit this description about people eating, drinking, and marrying. But again, if this is just describing these seals, then that makes sense, because once the mark of the beast is instituted, once the one world government is put into place, once Antichrist is at full power, then he is now going to focus his persecution onto believers, while the world is going to see this as a time of peace. They're going to love this one world system. They are not going to be persecuted, because at this point, the dragon has his beast system implemented. He feels like his plan, his end game is now manifested, where he can focus his attack on believers. And then, just as it was in the day of Noah, the unbelieving world are going to think things are all good. We're in a time of peace. We're eating, drinking, marrying, and then sudden destruction. Because what happens? Jesus Christ comes in the clouds, gathers together his elect, and then he pours out his wrath on the unbelieving world. And his wrath is described in the book of Revelation through the trumpet and vial judgments. This is why the post-tribulation pre-wrath rapture model makes the most sense of all these different texts. Revelation 6, Revelation 7, Revelation 8, Matthew 24, Luke 21, Mark 13. And so again, to the pre-tribulation rapturists, this precludes your model from being true, your eschatological model, because you can't show us where the trumpet and vial judgments are in the book or in Matthew 24 specifically. They should be there if this is explaining the battle of Armageddon. Matt, let's hand it to you, brother, as I know that was kind of a lot. And let's give you your last a little bit here, brother, to go through this creation material.
Okay, sure. Just to finish up, Donny and I are working on the new version of the website, and on it we're going to have a lot of articles, and these are some of them that we are working on and going over and publishing as soon as they finish. The one we talked about tonight was something that he brought up on post-flood populations and mutation rates and haplogroup formations and substitution rates. How would they play out if they were run in a simulation based on the observable rates? Well, that's been done. And the name of that study is actually probably already up on the website, right? It's called Post-Flood Populations, Haplogroup Formation and Fixation Dynamics. So what that does is it shows you through simulations using the observed rate of substitution what the population would have looked like, how it would have moved around, what the numbers would have been, and the time period based on the rates of mutation on forming the haplogroups and matching real world application. So that was a fun one. Another one that is not ready, but I saw somebody bring this up. How could a global flood produce all of Earth's oil? Another good one. Another comment, maybe, who was it? Mentioned it. Andrew Cumming, maybe? He said, well, there's nothing about Mars. Mars had water on it at one time. When did it have that? And I looked online. I was like, there's nothing from Young Earth Creationist about Mars at all. So another study coming up with predictions on Mars. Another one, Pando, what I call the not so oldest tree system. This is a good study. Might also as well already be up and ready to go. This is a two-parter. So what happened is when you type in how old is Pando, I think it comes up between like 13,000 and 80,000 years old. Huge gap. They believe that maybe it grew really slow because it was an ice age for a while. But anyway, what they did is they said this is an old tree system and it's older than the entire Earth in the Young Earth creation timeline. So how would we deal with that? There's nothing online yet again for this tree system. So here we go. Another one for Young Earth creationists. This one takes a simulation and shows you how it can be done. Because remember, this is a single tree system that grows underground, connected by roots. It's a single tree system, and it's just gigantic. So I show how it could have actually grown based on twigs and branches that can be grown like a clone. They land in the ground from a bird probably flying, and it starts growing another tree. And also, they used a mutation rate that had a lot of assumptions and wasn't a correct measurement of a mutation rate. So, but they tagged in their references another mutation rate study, and I went to that one, and when you apply that mutation rate to Pando, it lands on the biblical timeline using the observable actual mutation rate. That's much better. So that's another study that's up there. Another one, nightshades. This one's called the mystery of the missing mutations in plant DNA. And I did this one because there's a lot of DNA barcoding and mutation rates that are done on animals and humans, but very little done on plants. Well, the DNA barcoding website does have a lot on plants. And so I delve into that mystery and show the biblical timeline on that one as well. I also did the first, what is a kind? This one's going to be called When Barcodes Connect. And I decided let's run it on cats because we have a lot of different felines and we have big cats, little cats, we have saber-toothed cats. Where do they fit in? Do they all go back to a single cat kind that was on the ark? I really wanted to know because this has been one of the challenges for Young Earth creationists to define exactly what a kind is. Because we can be vague. We can say, well, it's just something that lands on the animal, the family kind. It's good enough. Or maybe it was just or it's a species. Oh, that doesn't help things. That doesn't make a lot of species to guess from. So this study specifically answers that question, and that one is actually finished as well. Another one that I like a lot is called The Illusion of Deep Time. This one targets radiometric dating in every way, shape, and form. It was originally just going to be a study on seafloor spreading, dealing with catastrophic plate tectonics and their timeline and their speed limit and the heat that would be generated from such a thing, and the timeline based on the observable rates of potassium and argon dating. But I took it a step further and went through every one. Another one, God taught Adam language, and there's something called the language acquisition time period that needs to occur where a child before puberty has to have language and they have to hear it to even acquire grammar. And if they don't make that cutoff, they will never learn it. It's one of my favorite subjects. So that's a good study. And then part 2 of that study will be a testable prediction on created speech. looking at the genes associated with speech. And then another one is called One Species, Many Names. And it takes about all of the hominins, Denisovan, Heidelbergensis, Homo erectus, Neanderthal, and humans, that were all classified in the exact same bin with DNA barcoding, which means we would be the exact same species. That's how similar and closely related we all are. And we all diverged from the bottleneck, completely contrary to evolutionary predictions and assumptions. And then only 2 more to go. Keep going. Migration after the flood. I chose 3 animals. I chose the kangaroo, the armadillo, and the koala. Why? Because they're either the most asked questions or they're the hardest to answer. And I go through as much detail as I possibly can on those migration scenarios and how they would have worked. Another one would have been what I call the million-year myth of clay lithification. It is called the mud problem. There is nothing resolving or answering it or even really talking about it online. Now there will be. And then the final one, the ultimate study, Donny and I are going to be doing together. It will be the ultimate destruction of evolution, all in one study together. It's called Retrofits and Revisions, how evolutionary theory fails at the test of predictive science. And we will be going through all kinds of things in that study. It's probably going to cover 12 different subjects, but it's required, because if you're going to refute evolution, you can't just talk about one thing. It's a broad spectrum. It's really a dynamic aspect of things that you really have to look at and see, what did evolution actually predict and what did we actually find. And this is a larger study that's going to be like every other one that I just brought up. It's going to be the size of all of them combined. So it is what it is. It has to be large, and we're glad to attack it. And that is something that we will probably be doing videos on in the future as well, because this is the kind of thing that creationists like, need, and want. So we like attacking and going for the subjects that really just don't exist. So when the subjects are brought up, creationists can like look it up and say like, oh man, I've never heard of Pando before. What am I going to do? I'll look up Answers in Genesis or CMI and see what they think. If they don't have an answer, then somebody's got to, and that's where we come in. We've always wanted to be able to do that. So that does it. That wraps it up for tonight. And let me check the comments real quick. Short comments flying by, not properly addressed at all. Blessing, Matt. Hey, how's it going? Standing for Truth. Matt and Donny, great presentation. I love watching you two putting all this scientific smackdown. There we go. Thanks, man. Good. Thank you much.
That's our brother Centurion, always showing the support.
Yeah, that's great, man. Awesome. Well, thanks. We're hard at work. So when you don't see us around or you don't think we're doing much, we're writing. We're always doing something. We're not going anywhere. We're actually more busy sometimes if you don't see us. So hope everyone has a good night.
Actually, Matt.
Yeah.
Let me just address this real quick before you wrap it up. Great presentation, by the way. Can't wait for people to see our articles. Kathleen Norton, appreciate the comments, sister. Good in-house eschatology debate. She says there are saints and elect. So again, this is what pre-tribulationists do. They don't give scriptures. They don't give evidence. They just give their opinions. They're really good at explaining what they believe, but they're really bad at demonstrating why what they believe is supported by the scriptures. There are saints and elect. No, I've done a study. I've done videos. You can check out my book. I've done an entire study looking at the word elect. And every time, even in the Old Testament, when it says Israel, mine elect, it's talking about a believer. That's Jacob. That's Jacob or Israel. And believers, especially in the Old Testament, are referred to as the elect. In Romans, you find that which Israel hath not obtained, the election hath obtained it. We're elect through faith in Christ Jesus. So gathering together his elect in Matthew 24 is referring to believers. The Bible also says in Matthew 24 that the Antichrist and the false prophet are going to be so deceiving, so convincing that if it were possible, saying it's impossible, he would even deceive the very elect. Israel is deceived. Okay. Who is he that denieth the Christ? He is Antichrist, right? And Jesus says, if ye'd believe Moses, you'd believe me. So they're blinded, they're hardened, they're deceived. But Matthew 24 is saying the elect will not be deceived by the Antichrist, which means they're clearly not Israel, because Israel is deceived. And so the elect are believers. When you see elect throughout the Bible, it's talking about believers. So this right here is just an assertion to say the church is gone. The Bible is very, very clear, especially in, and I'll just throw this as we wrap it up, because this is a fatal blow here to the pre-tribulation rapture. Now we beseech you, brethren, by the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. That's referring to the rapture. His first coming was in Bethlehem. This isn't coming 1.5. The next time he's going to be here is the rapture, and are gathering together unto him. This fits perfectly with what we read about in 1 Thessalonians 4, the coming of the Lord. It's the same language. So he says that ye be not soon shaken in mind, or be troubled, neither by spirit, nor by word, nor by letter as from us, as that day of Christ is at hand. So what's the day of Christ? Well, it goes back to what? The gathering together unto him. That's the rapture. Going back to what? The coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. He came the first time in 1st century AD in Bethlehem. The second time is at the rapture, the day of Christ. And notice what it says here, Matt. Let no man deceive you. Let no man lie to you. Let no man try to tell you something different. That's what Paul's saying. For that day, well, what day is it? Well, go back. The day of Christ, the gathering together unto him, the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. This is all the same day. This is the rapture. Shall not come. This means the rapture can't come except there come a falling away first. In the Greek, that's apostasia. So it's this religious falling away from Christianity worldwide. And that man of sin be revealed. Oh, that's the Antichrist. Apparently, we're not going to be here for the Antichrist, according to the pre-tribulation rapturists. But according to 2 Thessalonians 2, the rapture can't happen until the Antichrist, or the man of sin, is revealed. We know he's revealed at the abomination of desolation, which is at the midpoint of this final 7-year period. And so you can't have a rapture until at least the midpoint. Okay? So you can't have a rapture before the 7-year period begins. And he's revealed because he steps foot in the temple. He claims to be God. You read that here. Notice this. Who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. You can't have a rapture prior to the man of Christ, the man of sin, being revealed. And he's revealed at the abomination of desolation, which is 3.5 years into the final 7-year period. So to the pre-tribulation rapturists in the chat, you need to answer this challenge about Matthew 24 and the lack of description of the vial and trumpet judgments, which should be there if that's supposedly describing the Battle of Armageddon. I was just looking at the comments there. So that doesn't work either. And okay, so we'll see. The pre-tribbers, we might as well wrap it up, Matt, because we love you, but you're not answering the challenge. I made the challenge clear. If the pre-trib rapture is true, what I'm saying precludes your model. I'm sorry, it's false. It's been proven wrong. It's done. Unless you can answer this challenge, make a video, leave a lengthy comment, as long as it's actually addressing the challenge. Show me where in Matthew 24 we see hail and fire cast upon the earth. Where are these locusts that are terrorizing men? Where's wormwood? Where's mountain cast into the sea? It's not there, because that's God's wrath. And Matthew 24 is describing the tribulation. And it says after the tribulation is when Jesus comes in the clouds to gather together his elect. We've established that the elect are believers. And we don't see God's wrath until after the rapture, which is in Revelation. We read about that after Revelation 7 through the trumpet and vial judgments. They're not there in Matthew 24, because guess what? Matthew 24 is the rapture. It's not the Battle of Armageddon. The Battle of Armageddon is in Revelation 19, and it comes after the seals, vials, and trumpets, and it fits nicely with the pre-wrath rapture model, but it contradicts the pre-trib rapture model. Matt, feel free to wrap us up, brother.
No, I feel as though people like that topic a lot more than what we talked about mostly tonight. So we know next time we'll split it in half. We'll go with that one first.
Well, that's why we get the best of both worlds, right? End times and origins, our two favorite topics.
Yeah. Didn't you mention something about expanding on that book now?
Yes. Yeah, that is currently in the works to expand on my End Times Revealed book. So stay tuned. We're hoping to get an expanded version sometime in the next few months. So I'll keep you guys posted.
All righty. Okay, everyone. Hope you had a good night. Hope you had fun and learned something.
All right, guys. God bless you all. Standing for Truth is out.